Quick, before we start, if I asked you right now to name your enemy, the person you're quietly at war with, a face would come to mind. Fast. Someone specific. Hold on to that face, because by the end of this, there's a real chance you'll realize you've been pointing at the wrong person the whole time. So keep an open mind. Let's talk about who your real enemy actually is. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about that face you just pictured. You didn't find that person out there in the world, fully formed, as an enemy. Somewhere along the way, your mind built them into one, quietly, without asking you. And once you see how it did it, you're going to catch yourself in the middle of doing it again. And here's the part that makes this video about more than just you. Everybody does this occasionally. One enemy, one grudge, one person they've quietly cast as the villain. But some people do it constantly. There's always a new enemy, a new betrayer, a new person who did them wrong. If you know someone whose life seems to run on a rotating cast of villains, or if that someone is sometimes you, by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what's driving it. Because the occasional enemy and the endless enemy are the same machine. One's just running all the time. I know how this sounds. Stay with me, because this isn't about pretending nobody ever wrongs you. Real conflict is real. This is about the strange, specific way the brain takes an ordinary person and slowly turns them into a villain, and why it does that even when it costs you. Let's start with the part that makes no sense at first. You would think having an enemy would make you feel worse, more anxious, more unsafe. But psychologists found the opposite, and it's the key to this whole thing. A team of researchers led by Daniel Sullivan discovered that when life feels chaotic and out of your control, having a clear enemy actually makes you feel calmer, more in control, not less. Think about why. The scariest thing in the world isn't a villain. It's randomness. It's bad things happening for no reason at all. The layoff that wasn't about you. The illness that just showed up. The plan that fell apart through nobody's fault. Your mind hates that. It cannot stand a story with no one to blame. So it hands you someone, this didn't just happen. Someone did this to me. And the moment you have a face to point at, the chaos organizes itself. It feels solved. It isn't, but it feels that way. That's the first secret. A lot of the time, you don't build an enemy because they attacked you. You build one because you needed the world to make sense. And an enemy is easier to live with than chaos. Once your mind has picked its suspect, it goes to work building the case. And it has a whole toolkit. The first tool is that you start reading the worst into everything they do. A text goes unanswered for a few hours. They're ignoring you on purpose. They walk past without saying hi. That was a snub. They laughed across the room, obviously about you. Psychologists call this reading hostile intent into ambiguous moments. And here's the trap. Almost none of those moments actually had any hostility in them. The person was busy, distracted, lost in their own day. But once someone is a suspect, your brain stops seeing accidents. It only sees evidence. And this leads to the single most important thing in this entire video, the part that's genuinely uncomfortable. When you decide someone is your enemy, you start treating them like one. Colder, guarded, a little sharp, and they feel it. So they get colder and guarded back. And now, look what happened. The distance you were sure was already there, you just created it. You walked in expecting an enemy, and you quietly turned an ordinary person into exactly that. The moment you name someone your enemy, you've usually taken the first step in making them one. And they, on their side, are now starting to think the same thing about you. It gets stickier from there, because of a defense your mind reaches for when someone hurts you. One of the most primitive ones we have. It's called splitting, holding two opposite truths about one person at the same time. This person hurt me, and this person is also a full, complicated human with their own fears and reasons, is genuinely hard. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't resolve. So the mind takes a shortcut. It splits them. It drops all the nuance and files them under one clean label. Bad. All bad. Villain. Because villain is simple, and simple feels safe. This is why your enemy in your head is never a three-dimensional person having a hard year. They're a cartoon. Splitting is what flattens them into one. And once they're filed under all bad, your mind rewrites everything to fit. Every good thing they do gets explained away. They're only being nice because they want something. Every bad thing becomes proof of who they really are. Meanwhile, When you do the exact same things? You had reasons. You were tired, you were under pressure. It's a quiet double standard running in the background. Their mistakes are their character. Your mistakes are your circumstances. Same behavior, two completely different verdicts. One for the enemy, one for you. And you'll defend all of this to the death, because of one more thing your brain does. You are absolutely certain that you're seeing the situation clearly, objectively, just the facts, which means anyone who sees it differently, including them, must be biased, or blind, or lying. That certainty feels like clarity. It's actually the wall that keeps the enemy an enemy. It's why you could be handed a genuinely fair peace offering from this person and reject it on the spot. Not because it's a bad offer, but because it came from them. If they suggested it, it must be a trick. And now the part I promised you'd have to keep an open mind for. Very often, the thing that enrages you most about your enemy, the trait you find absolutely unbearable in them, is the exact thing you can't face in yourself. This is an ego defense, and it's one of the oldest ones we have. When a part of you carries something you can't stand, selfishness, weakness, cruelty, dishonesty, and you can't bear to see it in yourself, the mind does something clever and merciless. It pushes that thing outward. It puts it on someone else. Now the intolerable trait lives out there, in your enemy, where you can hate it safely, at a distance, instead of turning that hatred on yourself. The person obsessed with how selfish their rival is, the one who can't stop talking about how fake someone else is. Sometimes the enemy is holding up a mirror, and the reason they enrage you so much is that, somewhere underneath, you recognize the reflection. Now, hold on to all of that, because it's about to explain the person who always has an enemy. If building an enemy protects you from chaos, from complexity, and from your own shame, then imagine someone who is carrying an enormous amount of shame. A deep, often invisible sense of not being good enough, buried so far down they may not even feel it directly. That much internal pain is unbearable to sit with. So the mind does the only thing it knows how to do. It converts it. It takes that vulnerable, inward, something is wrong with me, and flips it into a cleaner, more bearable, outward, something is wrong with them. That conversion is why some people need a constant supply of enemies. Each enemy is a container for pain that's actually coming from inside. As long as there's a villain out there to be furious at, they never have to feel the far more frightening thing underneath, the shame, the fear that they themselves are the problem. Outrage feels powerful. Shame feels like drowning. So the mind picks outrage every time, and it needs a fresh target to point it at. When one enemy fades or gets resolved, the relief doesn't last, because the shame was never about them. So a new enemy has to appear, and another, forever. And for some people, there's a body-level layer underneath even that. If someone grew up in an environment where they truly weren't safe, where connection was unpredictable or dangerous, their nervous system can get stuck in a permanent state of threat detection. The alarm never fully switches off. They are, at a physical level, always scanning for the next attack, and a nervous system that's always looking for a threat will always find one. Not because the threats are real, but because the alarm can't tell the difference between a real danger and an ordinary person having a bad day. I want to be careful here, because this is not about handing you a label to slap on your difficult coworker or your ex. All of this runs on a spectrum, and every single one of us sits somewhere on it. The point isn't that person is a narcissist, or that person is traumatized. The point is that the machinery is human, it's in all of us, and the people who seem to live at war are just running it at full volume, usually because of pain they never chose and often can't see. So let's go back to that face from the beginning, and let's ask the real question. Who's the actual enemy here? Because look at what we just walked through. Your mind picked them partly to make a chaotic world feel controllable. It read hostility into moments that had none. It treated them coldly and then blamed them for the coldness. It split them into a cartoon villain and rewrote their every action to fit. It convinced you that you, and only you, were being objective. Sometimes it made them the villain for a flaw that was quietly yours. And underneath it all, it may have been protecting you from a pain that had nothing to do with them in the first place. That's not a person you discovered. That's a person you built. And the architect, the one who laid every brick, was your own mind. Now hear this part, because this is where people get it wrong. This does not mean you're paranoid, or broken, or a bad person. Every single thing your mind did here, it did to protect you. It builds enemies to make a random world feel like it has order. It builds them to protect who you believe you are. It builds them to give your pain a shape and a name, so you don't have to feel it shapeless and nameless. This is ancient, and it is universal, and every human brain does it. It's not a flaw in your character. It's a survival system doing its job a little too well, in a world where most of your enemies aren't actually threats. They're just people, having their own day, starring as the villain in a story they don't even know they're in. So what do you do with that? Not have no enemies. That's not real, and some conflicts are genuine. Some people really will try to harm you, and this isn't about disarming yourself in front of them. This is about the far larger number of enemies your mind manufactured that were never really enemies at all. And here's the most freeing thing about all of it. Because the enemy mostly lives inside your own head, you don't need the other person's permission, or their apology, or even their cooperation to take them apart. You built them alone. You can unbuild them alone. That's the whole power of this. The work is yours to do, and it doesn't depend on them changing a single thing. So before you lock someone in as the enemy, run 3 checks that jam the machinery. First, ask the question that breaks the whole spell. Is there a version of this where they're not the villain? You don't have to believe it, you just have to be able to imagine it. The second you can picture one innocent explanation, they were busy, they were scared, they didn't know, the case starts to fall apart, because certainty was the thing holding it together. This is also the direct antidote to splitting. Forcing yourself to hold one good thing about them alongside the bad one cracks the cartoon back into a human. Second, borrow their eyes for 10 seconds. Not to excuse them, to see them. What's the pressure they're under that you can't see? What does this look like from inside their day? The research on this is some of the strongest we have. Actually imagining another person's situation quietly dissolves the villain, because villains can't survive being understood. And notice, this one needs nothing from them either. You can do it entirely on your own. Third, and this is the one to save for the enemies you actually still want in your life, find the shared problem. When there's still a relationship worth saving, the fastest way 2 enemies become allies isn't a nice conversation, it's a common goal neither can reach alone. Point you both at the same wall, and us versus them quietly becomes us versus the thing. It won't work on someone who won't engage, and it's not for the people who genuinely mean you harm, but for the friend who became an enemy over something neither of you can quite remember. It's the move. And if you're the one who always seems to have an enemy, if you've felt yourself in the harder parts of this video, the bravest check of all is this one. The next time the familiar outrage rises up and hands you a fresh villain, pause and ask what you'd have to feel if that villain weren't there. Because that feeling, the one the enemy is protecting you from, is the real thing. And it's the one that, faced gently, actually sets you free. Which brings us to the last thing, the thing you already sensed at the start. If your mind builds your enemies, then your enemies were never fixed, never permanent, never simply true. Today's enemy really can become tomorrow's friend. Not because they changed, but because the story you were telling about them changed. And the reverse is just as real. The closest friend can become the enemy the moment your mind decides to recast them. The face you pictured at the beginning of this video was never your real enemy. Your real enemy was the story. The one your mind wrote because chaos was too frightening, because being wrong was too painful, because a villain out there is so much easier to face than the harder truth in here. You built them, which is the hard part. But it also means you're holding the only tool that can ever take them apart. So, no details you don't want to share. Has someone ever gone from your enemy to your friend, or your friend to your enemy? What flipped it? And is there someone in your life right now you've quietly cast as the villain who maybe, just maybe, is only having a bad day? You don't have to name them. Just sit with it. And if this made you look at that face a little differently, subscribe. This channel is about the quiet things our minds do that we live every day and never notice. I'll see you in the next one.